I will definitely miss it once it starts snowing. Then I will be very
Yeah.
upset.
Yeah, I think it's going to be a really bad winter. Like it's going
Yeah,
to be really cold.
just 2020 consistencies like that.
Yeah, just expect the worst.
Right.
All right.
So
Well,
are you oh yeah, Lexi, you can take
no,
this one
go
for a
for it.
second.
Go for it. Go for it.
I was just gonna ask if you were still doing research right now.
Oh yes.
Mhm,
Yeah, most of it's now obviously online based or
mhm,
research methods based. So actually doing research on the ways we do research. It's called meta science, which
mhm,
can still be done, but in person human experimentation is definitely off the table for foreseeable future.
definitely. What I'm curious to know what drew you into learning how you do research, like in regards to the meta analyses and breaking down.
Oh
Because I
yeah.
was reading on your website. Yeah.
Um, it started. I've done a lot of work in intelligence, human intelligence, and though the work I do is not very controversial, there's a lot of very controversial work in there, and there's a lot of very strong opinions in that, both among practitioners and among people who don't do intelligence research. And so
Mhm,
I got really interested in watching very intelligent, brilliant people act in very irrational ways when it came to research. And I was like, oh, this is really interesting. And then meta science just
mhm.
sort of started a couple of
Right.
years ago, really. Though there's been other branches that have done, like sociology of science has been around for a long time. That became one of my interests. Was like, I wonder how people interpret evidence and how do scientists do this. And then I did a study on children's ability to delay gratification and whether that's been
Mhm,
changing over generations. And I did some have people predict what was happening there. And again, got to see world experts in cognitive development just be dead wrong. And that kind of drew me further in. I was like, okay, this is a really interesting field to see what's happening, to see how
mhm.
researchers and scientists are approaching issues in non-optimal ways.
When did you like tap into that passion? Like college, high school?
Oh God, no. In grad school, I got interested in intelligence, but I was always interested in causality as well, which is really where my primary interest lies in studying causality and how it applies to the human experience or being a person or the human mind.
Mhm,
And then that's kind of taken me into many different fields, research methods being one of them, meta science being another one, social cognition, how people view kids these days, because that's all about like, are kids actually changing? And if not, what's causing us to think that they are? So this interesting causality, and some of it was actually really influenced by Dr. Aronson because he's a social psychologist who always do experiments. And I was trained as a developmental psychologist where experiments are less often done. There's a lot more long-term developmental work done in that field. And so I was being trained in one respect to think developmentally, and in another respect being trained to do the experiment and see what's causing what. But yeah, you definitely just keep stumbling into things as a professional interest. You sort of have some that you get that you early on you develop, but as you keep doing research, new fields start sounding more interesting, and you
Mhm.
don't give up the ones, but you're brought in different directions, and sometimes people have like
mhm.
one passion that just carries them through the day, and mine my passion is really about causality, and so that allows me to move to different worlds,
Yeah, tap into different aspects of psychology, which is super cool.
which is why I've done research on free will and the belief in free will, because that's kind of all about causality. And once you learn about like what's really happening in intelligence, you learn it's really all about causality. That's it. And so keep it's always this like interesting field of where is causality applying and where is it not? If it does or does not apply here, what does that mean for theories,
Mhm.
psychological theories that we have?
Can you talk to us about your research on free will? I've read on it a little bit, but for whoever's watching, can you
Yeah,
lead us?
right. So most of my work has been on the belief in free will and why do we believe in free will, and then what are the implications of that belief. And so that's been the main source of my research there. Not necessarily is there free will, although I've done a lot of thinking about that, not as much
Mm,
writing, really. But yeah, it's free will is all about causality. Can you in some respect cause outcomes?
Yeah.
Or is whatever led to your behavior or non-behavior, was that previously caused? And if so, are you really free?
Mm-hmm.
So that's my interest there. But also obviously the belief in free will. Most people believe in free will. They believe in free will pretty much all over the world. And does that matter if, for example, we say, hey, free will doesn't exist, or we get people to believe that? Does that change their behavior? How long do they believe that? So if you actually do an experiment where you get them to believe there's no such thing as free will, and then you follow them up a week, a month later, like, have they gone back to their previous beliefs, or are they like, oh no, like, you really convinced me? Those interests are sort of always. And then,
So,
who doesn't believe in free will? Why do some people believe in
mhm.
free will and others don't?
Professor, for someone who's never considered the ideas of if they are living with complete autonomous free will or not, how would you define free will to them?
Um, Cards on the table, I don't believe it exists in the way that we
Okay.
really want it to. So
Hmm.
that's going to obviously bias the way that I answer. But um,
Sure.
generally, most theories of free will have something to do with, can you make a choice? Can you weigh options? Can you cause a behavior that's consistent with a goal, either short term or long term? And
Hmm.
that could be considered sort of deciding or willing. And then the free part comes in. The free part is where things start to get dicey, and that is that itself free from causes, free from influences? Can you make the decision to stay in school or drop out? And
Right.
is that decision that you eventually make free of previous causes? Or can you say, well, we
Hmm.
have all these causes, but at the end of the day, I just decided to ignore them and go on and drop out of school or stay in school, or whatever it might be. So that's generally a very, very rough and not expert breakdown in any respect of the idea of free will. It's sort of the deciding to act or not act consistent with goals or long-term or short-term desires. And then
And that's
the question becomes,
independent of other factors and causes, ideally speaking.
right, I mean, this is where we get into philosophical distinctions between what's called compatibilism and incompatibilism.
Hmm.
So, if the universe is truly deterministic and there's nothing that happens without previous causes, does free will, can that coexist in that
Hmm.
space? And that's like, people who say yes are generally considered compatibilists. People who say no, determinism negates free will, would be called incompatibilists. And there's different branches and arguments within and across. It's a fascinating field, and the philosophical research is truly
Yeah.
truly spectacular. That's the stuff that I don't do. I don't do the philosophical side of it. I read it and I think about it, but it's not where my specialty lies.
But intuitively
Hmm.
speaking, right? Intuitively, like as I'm thinking about it, every action connects with one another, right? Because if you make a decision, it's based on other things that have happened. Someone doesn't get up one day and say, okay, I'm going to drop out of school. It's because of other things that have occurred in the past, right? So wouldn't all actions connect with one another?
Right, and that would be much more on the determinism side of
Yeah.
things. But some people will say, well, no, because you could have just decided to not drop out of school, or to not get that coffee this morning, or make that coffee, whatever it might be.
But it has to
Uh,
do with other things, like other past thoughts, other past actions. Something
right,
is making you make that decision.
and here's where I, as an interventionist in, for example, cognitive development, here's where I start to get wary, because there's a lot of research on ways to accelerate cognitive development, ways to make kids smarter or better students or whatever it is. But if it turns out that everything is causally related to everything else, then the answer is yes, everything does cause advances in cognitive development. We just don't know the size of that effect. It could just be super small. And that's where I'm like, no, I'm
Yeah.
fairly confident my sister jumping rope right now isn't going to make me more intelligent in
Mm-hmm.
any capacity. So can everything be causally related in some way? that's where I start to come back. It's like, philosophically it sounds great, and
Mm-hmm.
from sort of classical physics it sounds not sort of the dominant interpretation of quantum physics right now, but classical physics, it seems, yeah, everything is causally related. But once you get down to the psychological level, it seems, well, that can't be the case. It absolutely can't be. What somebody on the other planet does right now affects me in 2 minutes. But that's where things get tough to parse out, and that's where like my psychological training takes over a little bit more than my interests in the philosophy of underlying sort of determinism and free will.
Yeah.
This is amazingly fascinating. And at first, just because we're starting the interview right now, I just want to say we're both very curious young people, and we're going about the world at I'm 21 or 20, yeah, exactly. He's 22, and it's just like the start of everything, right? And I'm still an undergrad. I haven't graduated, and I've been thinking a lot about these ideas, and how much of the actions that I actually take are mine, and if I am actually autonomously living this life that is my life in a sense.
Mm,
So I really do appreciate you taking the time to speak with us today and diving into some of these ideas further.
sure, of course. And you both are lucky because NYU is considered one of, if not the best philosophy programs in the world, in the English speaking world.
Mhm.
So if you have other interests in this, you can, obviously when pandemic breaks and you can go back physically in school, if you have the opportunity to, even just ask if you can sit in on a class or two, because
Definitely,
you've
yeah.
got, I mean, NYU is full of phenomenal professors in all departments as well. But yeah, these are great big questions, and as people say that to me when I was younger as well, but like it's absolutely true. Like as you learn a little bit more, you just kind of like see this whole world open, and you're like, I didn't even know that there was this whole world of thought, of processes, of debate, and new ideas keep coming up. That's why it's, from a research perspective, the same thing happens. You're like, oh, I know about this tiny little aspect of attention control, and then once you talk to somebody who does that work, you're like, oh my god, there's this world, this universe of research, and maybe I'm interested, maybe I'm not, but yeah, there's
But
so
it's
much
still
going
an
on.
option.
Right.
Yeah, this is very, very interesting. Can you tell us about your schooling? You seem like a very smart man. Um,
Thank you.
how has your schooling
Indeed,
experience
indeed.
been?
I'm definitely a lifelong learner. I definitely keep reading studies, even in fields that I'm not directly doing research in. I keep trying to follow up and do things. I was a good student when I was younger. I was not a great student because I didn't want to do homework and projects and assignments, things like that. But my education was really great across the board. I went to University of Connecticut for undergraduate, where I majored in psychology and minored in philosophy, and then went to NYU. I was not expecting to go to grad school, but I did end up going to grad school. I was around the start of the Great Recession when I was graduating, and so is that true? No, that's not true. When did I graduate college? Yeah, 2007. That was right. Yeah, so right around that time, things were starting to collapse. Um, and then I met Josh Aronson and sort of joined his research team and got really interested in the things he was doing. And he was really good at sort of encouraging me to find the things that I was interested in, as opposed to just following what he does. And so it's really been, I've lucked out in the sense that I've had a lot of good mentorship and also good ability to find what it is that interests me.
I think mentorship is so important, especially like us young people trying to find our path, trying to find like our passions and goals. I think it's really important to have people, like older people, guiding you.
Right.
But they don't have that in school. They don't have like mentorship programs. We kind of have to seek that on our own. Do you think schools should place an emphasis on like mentorship?
Well, it's nice to say yes,
Mm-hmm.
right? It's absolutely great to say, like, I want every young student to find their way and to be mentored.
Yeah.
It starts to get a little impractical when you have one faculty member trying to mentor 50, 70 young people. And some people just don't want that. Some people aren't interested in whatever it is. And so the current system is odd in the sense that, to your point, like you kind of have to seek it out,
Mm-hmm.
but it purposefully selects for more driven students
Mm-hmm.
to go seek those things out. I think one thing that is very important for students to know is their professors are really interested in their own research topics and pretty much love it when somebody else gets interested in it as well. And so if you can cold email professors and just say, hey, I really want to join your lab, I'm really interested in this. Unless they have way too many people and not enough ability to support that, most professors are very interested in that. They're very excited about, like, oh, look, somebody's really interested in what we're doing here. And I think people don't know that. I think students might want to do that. They may want to reach out, but they think, oh, this will be a burden.
Mm-hmm.
Or especially in undergrad, you often don't see your professors that way. I know I didn't when I was an undergrad. I didn't see my professors as like world leaders in their areas of research. They were more the person who was teaching me and giving me the assignments that I had to do to get the grade. It wasn't until pretty much grad school that I started to realize, oh, like these are, I'm now reading papers by these people that I had previously. And so, yeah, so I think a lot of professors are generally happy to have students reach out to them, but students don't know that that's the case, or they think they're going to be a burden. And the worst case scenario is you ask and they say, they don't respond, or they just say, I'm sorry, I can't take any new students,
Yeah.
which is, but yeah, definitely encouraging students to do it more, I think would be very beneficial.
Okay.
Hmm.
So
It's almost like that genuine like curiosity and pull towards the subject and the interest is like what distinguishes like a student to show that they're actually want to be a part of someone's work, someone's research, someone's lab. And in that sense, you indirectly have it mentorship through it if the professor is willing. But in a way, what sounds like what you're saying is it's kind of weeding out the people who aren't willing to put themselves out there,
Or
ask
don't
for a
want,
chance,
or don't want to. Unfortunately,
or don't want to.
it'll also weed out people that don't think they can cut it, or there are institutional
Mm,
barriers to them. And that's sort of a downside of that, is that it
Mhm.
also could create or exacerbate inequalities that are happening in
right,
doing those things. I know I worked full time during college, and so I could not.
right,
I did join a research lab, but I could not join a research lab doing so many hours per week because I had to work. I had a full time job as well. And so students who also have that are further disadvantaged. But if you assign them that they have to get a mentorship, they still have to work, unless it's all paid
yeah,
internships. And then the question becomes, who pays, and is it the university that
right,
pays? So there's a lot of things that go into that, but there are always unintended consequences and side effects from that. So like the good side is it is kind of this filtering mechanism where you really
mhm,
are waiting for the really curious or the driven. But on the other side, the people who don't have the time but are also curious and driven are purposely left out of just the ability to do that. So maybe finding a way around that.
Do you
a
think
lot
there's
of
ways
causes.
to increase creativity and
Do I think
curiosity?
do I think what?
Do you think there are ways to increase curiosity and creativity in students? Or is it like an innate thing? Are people born creative?
Uh, I have kids, and I can tell you that I think obviously there's individual differences.
Mhm.
Everyone's different,
Yeah.
but kids are a lot more curious than adults are. And I think, and this is something I learned from Dr. Aronson, I think that there are things that happen throughout people's lives, educational lives really, that purposefully dampen curiosity.
Hmm, hmm.
A lot of it is like rote learning. A lot of it is like, well, in some things like a history class, like there is kind of a right, or a math class, there is a right answer, there's a wrong answer. But in a creative writing class or things that people start to get interested in, if you just make it about regurgitating facts, then that might I don't know the research on it, but might serve to sort of dampen people's curiosity about what's going on. It's a way of I don't know, it's a way of being exposed to things. Like being a part of an active research lab as an undergraduate is a great way to increase curiosity, because then you start to see there's a lot of questions going on, questions that we don't have answers to, and we can go find the answers out. And that's really exciting. But if the entire job of an undergraduate researcher was to just do literature searches or just code data and not be a part of
Right.
even seeing the high level conversations that are happening, then that might serve to hurt, that curiosity.
Mm-hmm.
Where in after let me find a better way to phrase this question. Through looking into your research and thinking about the ways in which you were so pulled by exploring causality, do you think other kids and students who are developing, well, not do you think, but where along the way did they start to become dampened and hindered in their sense of genuine curiosity? Are they just shut down? Is it a systematic kind of, I don't really think it's a systematic way, but I think indirectly people kind of shun genuine curiosity once you enter a traditional classroom setting and everyone is kind of like on an even playing field.
Right. I mean, I wouldn't be surprised. I'm sure there is research on this. Again, I don't know it, but I wouldn't be surprised if in some cases that starts as early as elementary school.
Mhm.
It can be, there's a lot of work. There's a lot of things that are assignments that are given and not as much opportunity to explore. There's also, in my lifetime especially, there was a lot of focus shifting just to English and math test scores, standardized test scores from things like No
Right.
Child Left Behind. And, you started to see other things get pushed out of the way, arts classes, things like tech ed classes get moved out of
Right.
the way
Yeah.
in the pursuit of these goals. And, I'm lucky in that my interests tended to align with things that were I guess in the way that my career developed, rewarded. But if my interests
Mhm.
were in building things, then I would not have been. I would not have been rewarded for that. If that's where like my real passion was, and I was like forced to do a research lab, and I probably wouldn't have ended up doing research at all. And but I wouldn't have ever known that if I was never exposed to that kind of a background. And I think that's where, as we see, high schools definitely focus a lot more on, you know, AP classes, test scores, just getting grades to get into good schools, and less of a focus on being able to explore things, explore new topics, explore new ideas. I think that we probably see some declines there, but like I said, I wouldn't be surprised if it can go all the way
Mhm.
back to middle school, even later elementary school, where it's all just, here's the information, repeat it back to me in a couple of weeks, and it's all test scores and getting ready for standardized tests.
And I can imagine,
Yeah.
like, even
Huge.
something as little as class size, right, can be a
Mhm.
huge factor in giving students the attention that they need, like having them ask questions and being able to like settle down the classroom. I remember I volunteered in a kindergarten classroom and they had like 30 kids in there
Yeah.
and they were asking questions and moving around, but like that's what, I don't know, 4-year-olds do. They move around, they ask
Right.
questions, but like the teachers were telling them to like be quiet and like settle down. And I'm like, why? Like they're supposed to be curious, moving beings. Like that's what, and now you're just telling them that they can't be who they want to be. They can't be themselves
Right.
at such an early age, which is so saddening.
Yes. Oh, absolutely.
So saddening.
Curious how the different educational systems may approach this differently. Because I know Lexi went to like a IB program, it was like a British
Hmm.
program, and I went to mostly public school in California, and the two systems seem like radically different.
Yeah. Yeah. And there's, the research is really difficult because to figure out what's doing what,
Mm-hmm.
you you have a lot of selection bias, as in people select to get their kids into an IB school or into a private school, or they can't select into those schools, whatever the, could be cost, it could be location, they're just not any around. And so it's really hard to do good quality research in this world, because
Mm.
you'll see work happening from a bunch of professors at, heavy intensive research universities whose kids go to a free form play school where there's no curriculum and they just do what they want. The kids are genuinely interested. That sounds great, but we don't know what those kids would have been like if they were sent to a standard public school.
Right.
And that's why you need research. That's why, you need to understand the causality there. What aspects of which schools could be changing kids.
But how do you really know if it's a school? Because there's different parenting styles, right? Different monitoring. What other factors?
Lots of causal factors.
Right. I
There's
mean,
so many different factors. So how do you know that the school, the private school or the public school is giving this change in the kid? It's, you know what I mean? You don't really know unless you see a huge pattern. Then you can find, like a reason. You're like, okay, it's a school. That's the reason. But
could be. Yep. I mean, to me, as an experimentalist, my immediate answer is, well, you do the experiment.
Yeah, of course.
Either find a school that has a new enrollment, or start a new school, or very big, ambitious projects. And then randomly assign people to go to that school.
Mm-hmm.
300 people, 300 parents sign up, but only 150 get to go, and you use a pure lottery system. There's no buying your way in. There's no donations.
Yes.
Something like that. And then you can look at what would have happened to these kids if they didn't go to this particular school.
Mm-hmm.
But sometimes those designs you just can't do. I mean, even just coming up with something right now, it's like, okay, but that's millions and millions of dollars to try and build a school for the purpose of that. It becomes unrealistic. And so you have to use more advanced sort of research designs to try and figure out what's going on, and could this be causing, could this not be causing, and then a complicating factor is there's a lot of motivated reasoning going into it. The type of researcher who wants to do that research sometimes knows the answer they want, and that becomes problematic as well. So that's why we really need to focus on good methods, I think.
Okay. So how would you, in a perfect world, how would you design a study for that? So would you build a school? Where would it be? Would it be sorry, my camera just went off. Okay, we're back in action.
This is a study to compare if the school is actually the main causality of the change in someone's genuine curiosity.
Right. I mean, in the most ideal world, you would intervene, as in you would find a bunch of kids who were, say, going to a low-income public school,
mm-hmm.
and you got to take half of them and randomly put them in whatever schools you wanted to investigate. And then the question becomes, what happens when kids move from school A to school B? Because it's not just the effect of being in school B, but it's also the effect of moving into school A. You're changing friend groups, you're changing. So there's a lot that goes in there. And then you can start to look at some of these things. And there has been research similar to this. There was a study called Moving to Opportunity, where families in low-income neighborhoods were randomly given a voucher to move out of assisted housing to suburban areas, and the kids also moved with them, and they got to go to new schools. And there's interesting research about what happened there and how long those effects lasted, and did people stay there, or did they move and then they want to move back to where their community was, or where their friends were, or family may have been. So there is very interesting designs that happen like this, but the really big studies are fewer and far between, and people want to know the answer. And so other studies get done where you just start correlating school characteristics and child characteristics, teacher characteristics and child characteristics, because that research is easier to do. You often have existing data you can do that on. Mm-hmm. So there's a lot of questions, but to do the ideal experiment is very, very difficult.
I'm sure.
So, Professor, to what extent to do these? Oh, sorry, Lexi.
Tommy, go ahead.
I was just gonna ask generally, to what extent do these studies actually impact the school system, or have you seen?
So there's a whole branch of people involved in policy analysis, and I've started getting into more conversations with them because there's movements in psychology, in other fields as well. It's starting to move in education research too, about improving methods, being open and transparent, something called pre-registration, where you sort of lay out how you're going to analyze your data before you collect it or before you analyze
Mhm.
it. So that way it's not like, well, we did it this way, it didn't work, we did it this way. You know, you analyze it iteratively. But the policy analyst people, from what I can tell, they're not at the place where they can ask that of people, they can demand it. What they can do is they can take the literature that they have and
Mhm.
synthesize that into some sort of insight or some sort of movement or some sort of policy recommendation. And so that's where there's these different incentive structures, and they do have like this research does have policy implications, and it sometimes does change policy, but there's a lot of politics, there's a lot of budgetary constraints that go into these things as well. So it's a lot more than just, hey, this research looks like it's what's best for kids, and then all of a
Mhm.
sudden all the schools are enacting it. It's not
Right.
how it works, unfortunately.
So to really oversimplify it, there's a ton of research that's done. They bring it to people who look at the research and then try to package it in a way to propose to policymakers. And then those people who are in charge of the policy look at what was proposed and then determine if they want to basically invest money in certain programs and change schools in a way.
That's one of the ways it happens. I mean, a lot of times, excuse me, a lot of times the policy analysts themselves are doing the research.
Analysts, right?
Right. Sometimes there's consultants who work directly for, I mean, at the end of the day, unless you're talking about a private school or a private network of schools, these come down to state and local government decisions. And so
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
the question becomes, where are they getting their information from? Sometimes
Right.
they have education consultants or education policy advisors, but often not at the state, not at the local level, certainly. And then,
So
yeah,
I guess
so
the
there's,
question is then like how much of it is a priority to these states? But go on.
Yeah, exactly.
well, education has been defunded for a very long time. So if at the end of the day, you say that your priorities are what you fund, not what you claim, then
Right.
even though they'll say, oh, education is our top priority, we want to look out for our students and our next generation, if that's not what they're budgeting for, then that's not really where their priorities are at.
Hmm.
And with a defunding of
True.
education, you see, I mean, like, you can say it's a top priority, but consistently defunding something is not evidence that it's a top priority for you.
Yeah.
Is there any state or program off the top of your head that you know is increased funding?
It's not something I know about. So that's not, I don't work too much in policy. Although my research on cognitive development does have implications for policy, it's often not. I don't work too much with the policy analysts
Yeah,
themselves, and so yeah,
no problem. I was just
not something
kind
I
of
know about.
curious.
But the thing is, it's sad because you do all this great research and other researchers do all this great research. They have all these great outcomes. Like, if this happens and we can really increase education, we can really help students, we can help students in urban areas and all this great stuff. But then it goes to the policy, right? It goes to the policy people and nothing is done about it, right? And we don't give money to like urban school districts. Why is that? Right? We know the answer. But it's just so sad because it's like you're doing this research, but then it's like, what's happening? What's the effect of the research that you're doing? How is it coming into fruition and actually making a change?
Right, and I think my experience with the researchers side of this, people want their research to actually have policy implications. They want it to make life better for people. And
Yeah.
sometimes that means we have to abolish some programs because they don't work or they hurt. Other times it's we should uptake these programs, or we should expand these programs.
Yeah.
I think I think most people who do this kind of research do want to see that happen, do want to see those implications of their research, because it's more than just a publication at that point. Now you
Yeah.
might actually be helping people, but there's a lot of steps in between publishing research that shows X and the possibility of X being implemented at a state or local level.
Yeah. So I want to go back to this ideal perfect school we were talking about before.
Yeah.
Do you think that we should be teaching our kids all the subjects, or do you think it should be more personalized at a younger age? So like, we have the math, we have the science, we have history, what else do we have? All like the 8 subjects, right?
Right.
You have the art, you have PE. Do you think we should be specializing our children earlier on based on their interests, based on their wants?
So if this was about college undergraduates,
Mhm.
I would say expose them to as many things as possible and let them decide for themselves.
Okay.
Because that's how you find your passion. It's how you find what you're interested in. And sometimes that might be Spanish cinema, and sometimes that might be, physics, like astronomy. There's no telling what it's going to be if you've never been exposed to it. I want to say that for younger kids as well. I really do. I want to say we should be exposing them to as many things as possible and letting them decide. Part of the problem is, from a cognitive development standpoint, younger people children are not able to understand everything. You can't teach symbolic logic to a 4-year-old. You can try, but there are cognitive barriers, developmental barriers that are preventing them from doing that. And also, they are children. They don't necessarily know what's best for them or what they're really, we might know what's interesting, but sometimes what's interesting is just playing video games, and that's it. And you're not really, I wasn't interested in school, and the idea that I would end up going to school for effectively my entire life was ludicrous to me. But once you find something, and I didn't find something until I was in my or not my late, but in my 20s, certainly. And that's an oddity. That's not normal. And so I would love to say, let them specialize early, but they don't really know what interests them. You can't expose them to everything because just developmentally, they can't take in everything. They don't understand. If you took a 6-year-old to the pyramids in Egypt, they wouldn't understand the grandeur and the historical significance of that because they're 6.
Yeah.
And so you can't expect that to happen, essentially. And so that, yeah, I'm a big fan of exposing people to as many positive things as you possibly can and letting them find what interests them. But children have, compared to their adult selves, developmental delays.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
And we're just not, we're not cognitively who we are as an adult when we're 9 years old, 11 years old. And so there is an element where you do have to sort of say, I can't just let you choose for yourself. You do have to be exposed to all of these things,
Okay.
as opposed to simply choosing what you want to be exposed to, because we don't know. I mean, even in late adolescence, early adulthood, we don't know everything that interests us or everything that we find, but we're better able to plan ahead, think ahead than we are as children. So not the firm, solid answer of oh yes, this path, but
yeah.
Yeah. So at what age would you personalize, specialize? Because I feel like college might be a little bit too late. Because I did that.
Right.
I mean, Tommy mentioned it before, but I went to a British school system in high school.
Mm-hmm.
And so the first 2 years, you pick 8 subjects. And I picked a lot of science and heavy math. And then I realized I really don't like math and I don't really like science. So then I started choosing history and psychology and writing. And that's when I really realized that I like those subjects way more. And that's when I was my junior and senior year. And so I think that was a perfect time for me, but maybe I could have found out earlier, maybe I didn't have to waste my time.
Right.
And it's a waste of time, but.
No, because you did learn from it, right? Not only did you learn the material, but you learned that's not for you.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Cognitively, from a cognitive standpoint, do you think that's an appropriate age to start to veer kids in that direction?
From a pure cognitive development type standpoint, I would say college is the right time.
Okay.
But not everyone goes to college.
Yeah.
And it seems unfair for people who, and this might be radical. It was radical to think this way for me growing up, but maybe college isn't right for everybody. Some people just don't want to be in that learning environment. Some people want to be out working. Some people want to do trades. They want to do, careers that actually often make more money than if you just go get a college degree in psychology. And so, right. And so to prevent people from having that opportunity to be exposed to things at a younger age, and say like a high school age, I think does a disservice, because it doesn't allow them to. But again, that falls in the line of like, you have to force them to be exposed. You can't just let them choose. So there is this element of like, you do have to force them to be exposed to things like science, like physics or chemistry and biology in high school, but also tech, also computer science, also history, also, but that puts a lot of burden on schools. Not every school can afford to do that. They can't afford to hire people to be able to teach those classes. So in an ideal world, yeah, even in high school, I think we should be forcing people to be exposed to more things, but maybe not, maybe cut down on how many math classes they have to take.
Right.
Still require them to take math classes, right? Still get through algebra, maybe through geometry. I don't know, maybe statistics instead of geometry. Lay out before them, if you want to go into science, you're going to have to do calc and so on and so forth. But if they have no interest whatsoever in pursuing anything in the sciences, saying, okay, you're going to have to take trigonometry and pre-calc at minimum is an odd choice. But you need it for the SAT, and so that's where our incentives lie. Like, what are we trying to do here? We just trying to get them into college. And I'm sure you were as well, but I was part of a generation that was told, just go to college. Doesn't matter what you major in, but go to college. And that's just not true. There's a lot of people who have much better lives, and college is not for everybody. But letting people experience 100%. Some of those things and find out for themselves is key. But like I said, you have to kind of force them to be exposed to it first, and then let them decide. It's a balancing act.
Well, I remember being a student, and my school system had a very much system that sounds kind of like what you were saying. It was like, expose people to as many different classes as possible, whether you like it or not. Each one is weighted equally. So you take your honors physics or your AP chemistry, and both those classes are going to affect your GPA in some way to tailor to the valued result of getting into a four-year college. And I just remember it was so tough sitting through some of the classes in which I genuinely was not interested in, but it's weighted exactly as the same as the ones I might be, or less. If I like to play the trumpet, and I remember the band class is pretty much dismissible on a college application compared to like your AP calculus class, even though I was so much more passionate about the band class. So that was really fascinating to see. But I'm very much want to take a few steps back, because I'm curious about the genesis of your passion for causality, and how you got so into trying to see the root of things, of problems, and how we become who we are.
That was probably in grad school, to be honest. It was probably grad school where I took a lot of research methods courses. It was one of the bits of advice given to me entering grad school was take as many methods courses as you can, because the content courses you'll probably forget, except for the things that you study, but always focus on as many methods courses. And I don't know what it was. I just thought they were really interesting, and NYU had great resources for these sort of methods courses, and just figuring out like, okay, does X cause Y to humans, to people, to everybody, to only some people? How does it happen? I don't. It's not something as straightforward as, oh yes, I was beaten up by causality when I was 10, and I've always wondered why. Like, it's not anything like that. It's I don't know what it is, but I just think it's absolutely fascinating. I mean, I could tell you, I started doing research on the long-term effects of interventions on cognitive development. And so you do an intervention on young kids, great, you make them smarter, you make them better at school, and then you follow up what happens years after the intervention ends. You find the effects go away. And I was interested, okay, well, what does that have to say about theories of cognitive development? Sort of connecting this causality, like you can change people, but once the change is over, it doesn't lead to further changes. Does that have implications? Right. Does that have implications for cognitive development theories? It does for a lot of them. A lot of them were predicted that should not happen. But I was still and that's still very interesting to me. but that's still, I still had an initial interest in making kids better, but also what happens when it's over. Like what happens when the intervention is done, the experimenters go home, the kids go home, and we see what happens for the next 3 to 5 to 10 years. How are their lives different? Are their lives different? So there was still an interest before before I found out the results, and we're like, oh, this has causal implications. So I don't know what it was about causality in this respect. Just maybe it was something that I could take with me across all my different interests in different fields. Maybe that's it.
So would you say the root of it stemmed from your personal experience with the education system growing up?
No. That one I can pretty emphatically say no. I only had one in my undergraduate time. I only had one professor show any interest in any of my ideas from a research perspective. That was really big for me, actually. I had a lot of research ideas, probably reflecting on them now, most of them were bad. But at the time I didn't know that. And one professor in particular showed interest in my interest. But I was also in a research lab, and not this professor's, and all I was doing in that research lab was a literature search. It was a year and a half of literature searches. And I have no idea why I ended up going into research with that kind of a setup, because no one would listen to me except for one professor, and all I ever did in research was literature searches. But when I actually did get to grad school, which again, no idea why I decided to go based on that setup, I found that there were questions you could ask, and these questions have answers, but we don't know the answers, and we can go find them with the right methods. And that's what really drew me in and has kept me in for 10 years now since I entered grad school, 12 years maybe. So, yeah.
The no idea as to why I entered with that setup makes me really think about the free will stuff we talked about earlier.
Yeah. Was I always going to do this, right?
What about I was just gonna ask, what about earlier than undergrad? But go ahead, Leisha.
No. We can just finish this and then move on, because I want to talk about e-learning. So. Oh,
sure. No, nothing earlier than undergrad either. I didn't even know research was a thing like that. I started college as a physics major. I wanted to be an astronaut, but I couldn't do that. So, nothing. Before.
Why couldn't you do that?
I have a disability, and so there's a neurological disability, and NASA has the ability to be pretty picky.
Yeah.
So I didn't know that when I started college, but it ended up becoming a non-starter while I was in college. So yeah, like nothing before college either would ever have led anybody to believe that I would go down this path.
So interesting. Have you thought of the cause of that?
There's something, right? There's something. Just don't know what it is.
I mean, you just went towards whatever drew you based on your past experiences, right? Based on things that have happened in your life, then you just go down a certain path.
And I was lucky enough to be able to pursue the path too, right? Not everyone can pursue the path. So there's definitely a big element of luck in there as well.
So you call it luck? You believe in luck?
Only in the sense that what I wanted to do and my life situation allowed them to converge, right? If something had changed, let's say a family member had gotten sick and I had to be the one to, I was working full-time through college, but I wasn't making a lot of money. Let's say I had to quit and pursue more money to help sick family members.
Yeah.
I would not have been able to do that.
Yeah.
And so luck in the sense of life situations helped facilitate and certainly did not get in the way of me being able to go down these paths. And that's not something people have. People have systemic, um, what's the word? Impasses put in front of them. Life doesn't work out sometimes. You know, you apply for jobs, you don't get them. You apply to colleges, you don't get in for whatever reason. And, you know, luck in the sense of you don't get to pursue that path. And so I got lucky because I was able to at least follow where I wanted to go
Right.
to an extent. I guess I couldn't be an astronaut, which is what I really wanted to be. So unlucky in that respect, but we'll find our way.
Right. Confounding factors that are kind of out of your control, especially
Right.
like in regards to NASA's rules and people not getting sick in your life and stuff,
Exactly.
things like that.
Yeah, definitely. Those are just like your privileges. Just because, like, I know some people they're bored into a certain situation, right? That's unlucky, I guess, right? Because they didn't ask
Right.
to be born in that situation. It's just how things happened.
Mm-hmm.
Totally out of their control. But
sometimes you or a parent runs over a nail, car tire blows, can't afford to fix it, can't get to work, lose a job. Like that's just bad luck.
Yeah.
Right? Like you didn't ask to, you know, run over that nail, and the guy in front of you didn't run over the nail, but you did. And that happens all the time. This is where we get the cycles of poverty, or it's a lot of things that can go wrong very quickly that are completely out of people's control.
And I wonder what kind of mindset or way of looking at the world could cause a different perspective after that happens, you know, because I think people would handle that situation differently depending on their
outlook
state, really.
Right.
Yeah.
You know, certain optimisms or mindsets about
growth mindset. There's a lot of work on growth mindset and how that affects people's paths.
Right.
Yeah, most definitely. I would think so. And that's why I was so curious to learn about if you thought there was a cause to you becoming the researcher that you are.
Yeah, certainly there are. And some people, there's a, it might be slightly disparaging, but there is a term called me-search, where you basically do research, where you do research on yourself. So if, you know, so if I were doing research, I have epilepsy. If I were doing research on epilepsy and I became an epilepsy researcher, that would be an example of research. If I grew up in a home of drug addicts and I was doing research on the long-term effects of growing up in homes of drug addicts, that would be an example of research. And some people, they can point to that and they can say, like, I'm very interested in being a counselor for substance abuse because I got over substance abuse, or I'm very interested in this because I had this life experience. I had a parent with Alzheimer's. I'm interested in Alzheimer's, whatever it is. I don't think I have that, at least not as clear cut as many people do. But there's certainly things that led me down this path and my interests. And sometimes it could just be a good teacher, right? You might take a class that you might be exposed to a topic that you're going to be really interested in, but you have the misfortune, the bad luck of being taught by just a terrible teacher. And so
it happens all the time.
Yeah, we've all had bad teachers. And so you might think, well, I guess I'm just really not interested in that. And that's an example of bad luck. Like you're kind of missing out on what might become a big passion for you. If you, Tommy, had like a horrendous trumpet instructor originally, you'd be like, oh, this is not for me. Like, this is too much stress or whatever it might be.
Definitely.
Yeah, so that's a big thing. I think teachers have a larger effect than they think they do, and that the research might show. But in this way that maybe people aren't thinking about, of like, teachers can facilitate people finding what they're interested in. But like what they're interested, you can't force somebody. You can't force me to be interested in playing the trumpet. You can't do it. You can't force me to be interested in the details of organic chemistry. It's just not going to happen, no matter how great of a teacher you are. But if I'm interested in something, definitely get in the way of that. Like a bad teacher.
It's almost like a great teacher can see this like small spark within you and then like just engulf it into a massive flame if they're able.
Right. And once you teach, you definitely know that not every student is inherently interested in what it is you're teaching.
Right.
Yeah.
Definitely.
And I've taught research methods and statistics, sort of like the bane of all undergraduate psychology students. So I definitely have seen students just be like, "This, I hate research methods. I hate it." And you have to be like, "It is really interesting, and I'm going to try and make it like relevant and interesting for you." But
Mhm.
it's not something like teaching a class on infancy, where a lot of people are like, "Oh, like babies are cool. Like this is fun research."
Yeah.
Um, so
But I also think there's value in like the professor, the teacher liking the subject and being
yeah,
genuinely interested in the subject too. Because sometimes I have professors that I hate the subject, but I really like the professor. And I'm like, okay, I'm gonna do well in this class because I really like I mean, I want to do well, but like
yeah,
I really do like want to impress the professor, and like I really like the professor. So, and I know that the professor is passionate about the subject. Because sometimes there are professors, I'm like, do you even like the subject? Do you even like teaching? Because it
yeah.
doesn't seem like it. So
Well, and this is where kind of like in the policy debate, you start to get to like the dark underbelly of things, and what say an undergraduate student or even sometimes a graduate student doesn't see is sometimes a professor is assigned to teach a course, or they're tasked to teach a course that
yeah,
they don't know about, or they haven't thought about for since they went to grad school, and but they kind of have to do it. Like the course needs to get taught. They drew the short stick essentially. So that
Mhm.
does happen. You know, there's political movement within departments about who has to teach what. So all these things, they occur, but kind of like I was saying, when you're an undergrad, you often don't think of your professors as like research people, or
hmm
you
hmm
know, they're just kind of like the person teaching you the stuff and holding the grade hostage for you.
Right.
You know, there's a lot more going on. You just often don't think about it that way.
yeah, definitely, definitely.
I had a great professor who used to tell us, don't think of me or your fellow professors as just grade dispensers. Like, we actually care.
Yeah.
That's funny. I
I
like
mean, if they didn't like what they were doing, I wouldn't think that they'd be teaching it. It's a big time commitment, but
Right.
maybe not.
well, yeah, if
So
they're assigned to the subject, if they're assigned to the class, then like they have to do it. And they're doing their own research on like the side, but then they're just teaching this class. I've had many professors like that at NYU where I'm just like, oh my God, do you enjoy this life? Like, are you enjoying yourself right now? Because it's not doing it for me. But
And you know, some people, they enter academia solely to do research, and
exactly.
teaching is
Yeah.
sort of this burden to them on the side, but what they really want to do is research, and that's fine. Sometimes you can definitely sense that in a
hmm
professor, but a
mhm.
lot of professors, even if they're very involved in research, do genuinely love teaching, especially the things that they're interested
Yeah.
Well, it's
Yeah.
amazing how sensitive students are to it.
in. Mhm.
Yeah. And
Like,
I'm sure departments know like this professor would be better at this subject, so I'm going to put them there, right? Rather than just like randomly assigning professors to subjects, right?
It would be a fun study to do from my perspective, to
That would be great.
randomly assign professors to courses and then see what happens to the students and see what happens to
Either
the teacher.
grade. Yeah.
Right. But that's the experimentalist in me.
That would be fun. I would do
Right.
that experiment.
But that's what I mean about like research methods is, you know, you can start thinking of these things like all the time, just being like, oh, we can do that experiment. We can, you know, probably not going to happen like that experiment. It might actually be harmful to students, so you wouldn't want to do it, but fun
it's
to think
possible.
fun to think through.
Hmm.
Definitely.
I do remember, Lexi, you had a question about e-learning.
I did. I did. What do you think about e-learning? How do you think we can cater it to students to make it more fun, more effective? I know some students like e-learning, like my brother, he loves being at home. He's able to, play his video games as
Yep.
much as possible, but then also stay home and learn. He says it's easier.
Mhm.
But I know other young people don't like e-learning. I know Tommy's taking online classes and he's like not enjoying it as much. So what do you think about it? Also, are
Uh,
you teaching?
I'm not teaching. No.
Okay.
It's definitely one of those situations where I think the students who have the ability to focus and regulate themselves will definitely do a lot better than the students who don't. And I mean, obviously, like if you're gonna just sit at home playing video games with your camera off the entire time, listening in,
Mm-hmm.
you're not gonna get as much out of it. But that's not necessarily completely unique to e-learning. Even in a physical classroom, everyone has their laptops open. They might be doing whatever, and unless you're going to walk around inspecting laptops, like you don't know, and so you kind of hope that people are paying attention. As a professor, you can call on people to sort of make it known that people are going to get called to the floor to say something about what you're talking about. It's the format is not completely different from in-person classes though, right? I mean, you sit there, you're looking at slides, professors teaching you from their slides. There's encouraged conversation. The better teachers might be able to create little sub rooms of people and group assignments and so on and so forth, but the format isn't totally different. I think it's the distractions are a lot worse. And there's a bigger strain on self-regulation on the students this time. And that's where you're going to see, in my belief, increases in educational disparities between high achieving and low achieving students as a function of this. Now, for most places or many places, it's required. But let's say you've learned that you're really bad at e-learning, like it's not for you. And fall 2021 comes up and e-learning is now an option. It's not a requirement. It requires an additional level of self-regulation to say, I know I'm bad at this, so I'm gonna not choose it. Than it is to say, I know I'm bad at this, but this is a lot easier for me to kind of sneak by. And so that's where you're going to see it, because it's drawing on, it's taxing individual students' self-regulation more to try and do it successfully. I think we're going to see a widening of achievement gaps between high and low performing students as a function of this. Where high achieving students might not actually be harmed that much, and in a way might benefit. Maybe not to a great extent, but, and this is all confounded with the pandemic. Once the pandemic's over, e-learning will stick around, but it'll be interesting to see how it works out.
That's an interesting point you make, because I did my last semester at NYU online, but I didn't really take it. I mean, I did really well, but I didn't take it seriously just because I'm like, okay, it's my last semester. Maybe that probably was a factor, but like, I'm like, this is a pandemic. Like, the professors didn't seem as like serious about everything just because there was so much chaos going on.
Right.
But what's my point? My point is, I'm not sure how e-learning can really be integrated into our society, to be honest with you. Just because you can do work from your bed, like you can do class from your bed, fall asleep, right? Wake up, watch the recording again, right? If the professor records it, have meetings with your professor on the side while like in your room. I don't know how successful it can actually be, right? I think it just comes down to discipline, right? Self-discipline, self-regulation, what you were saying, and just motivation.
Now, there has been for many years a huge e-learning system already in place. Continuing education has a lot of e-learning component, accreditation, and a lot of certificates and things like that have a lot of e-learning components to it. So these things have already been around. They're just now no longer being applied because of pandemic. They're no longer being applied to only the people that select into them, but they're being sort of forced upon everybody.
Exactly.
But these systems, I don't know that, I'm sure there is research on pre-pandemic e-learning outcomes, but it seems that people have been doing these for many, many years. They've been getting certifications, and they've been able to use what they've learned to some extent. I don't know the research on comparing pre-pandemic e-learning to in-class learning, So this isn't completely new. It's
So
just now being forced upon people who might not want it and might not be able to succeed at it.
exactly. Before, people were choosing to do online classes because of
Right.
whatever life situation they were in. Now, especially young people are like, it's foreign. This is crazy to them. Obviously, they're now getting used to it.
Right.
Um, but I don't know where I'm going with this. I had another question for you. Yes, what do you think about like students in certain areas where their parents are not necessarily involved? How can we cater to them with e-learning, right? Because kids can, their parents go to work, right? They're home alone and they don't have anyone to tell them, okay, log on to class, right? Or they log on, but then they leave, right? They turn off their video and they leave. So how can we kind of mitigate those effects? Is there a way at all?
I mean, that's another place we're going to see a growing disparity occur for exactly those reasons. If parents have to go to work, they don't have
Yeah.
the luxury of having a remote job. You can't oversee that. And so, or let's say you have parents who can oversee it, but the parents themselves are not tech savvy. They don't know how to oversee this. The parents are distracted as well. I said I have a first grade child, and it's a part-time job to keep her on task in school, in distance learning school. Um, if I wasn't here, or if I had to go into an office, we're like, we don't know what we would do. Ask a grandparent to come in, but are the grandparents equally savvy? Ask aunts and uncles, or send them back to school if we have to. It definitely has this potential, and I think probably will cause these, or sort of exacerbate already existing educational disparities. I'm not sure the solution, really. The only
Mhm.
benefit to spring was that everybody was affected. So spring got to be this sort of like asterisk, 2020 grades asterisk. Fall now, not everybody is mandated to be distance learning. Some places are, some places aren't. Some places you get to choose. And that's where you get these selection biases from trying to figure out what's the effect of e-learning on student outcomes. The parents that choose to send their kid to school might not want to, but they both have to work. And so like it's unclear what's going to happen with that. I think what we'll see is in the places where, at first, the places where it's optional, you'll end up seeing, where distance learning is optional, you end up seeing it doesn't seem to harm kids as much, or doesn't seem to exacerbate inequalities as much, because it's all the high achieving students whose parents are either working remotely or don't have to work or can afford to have somebody stay nearby that can come in and help. But as the research gets better, I think we're definitely going to see these inequalities grow. I don't know if they can be fixed that way. Forced e-learning, as we were saying, taxes self-regulation and self-regulated learning to an extent that has not been done before. It's much more so than in person. So I don't know. Maybe we'll know. Maybe we'll
Very
know in
curious to see.
2021.
It's a pretty positive answer.
I would love to give such happy answers. I really would. Um, I do think actually one thing we'll find is that in 2021, enough teachers now have been doing this and forced into it, really, that there's start to be some dissemination on like ways of getting kids engagement better in e-learning environments from a research perspective that we just don't know right now, because it's never been as necessary.
It'd be very interesting to see how the next few years turn out. Because I guess in the best case scenario, you'll have a whole generation of students who are very independent and who can discipline themselves to sit down and learn something on their own time.
Right.
Whereas there will most likely be a ton of other people who struggle to do. I mean, I struggle to do that. I like moving around. I like sitting in the front row. I like raising my hand, and there's like a physical aspect to asking questions,
Right.
But
I think, if you think about a kindergartner right now who never went to preschool call it. This is all they know of school. They don't
Exactly.
have the
Yeah,
context for this being different.
definitely.
As
Yeah.
far as they know, this is just the way school works
Yep.
because they've never
Yep.
been to anything else before. And so maybe for them, it won't be as bad because they're not comparing it to some other idealized, like we have memories of in-person classes. They don't. And so however long this lasts, yeah, they might be just significantly better at it, more comfortable with the process. Kindergarten's a little young, but the more experience you have with it, the more experienced you are, really. And so for whatever
I can
reason,
imagine this opens a whole. Oh, go on. Sorry.
no, that's it. Whole field of research could happen from this. And
Exactly.
yeah,
I was gonna say a whole like plethora of research opportunity now for online learning
right.
and online education.
Definitely.
Because
Yeah.
I mean that's their new normal, right? If people are so used to the e-learning, like you can't just switch it back on them because that's all they know. So
Right.
it's like e-learning will never go away in this sense because that is just as normal to some as in person was to us. And who are we to say that they can't have their normal schooling?
An incoming college freshman has never experienced, who has to do e-learning, has never experienced the college classroom, anything else. They might, you see it in movies maybe, but they haven't physically experienced that in any other way. So maybe when in 2021 they get to go in person, they're like, I actually don't think I like this as much. We have no idea.
And then this brings up a whole question in my mind as to like, can a college then justify like the same costs for a student who remotely learns, a student who actually goes in?
It'll be a question. It'll certainly be a very big question that colleges are going to face. I know they've already faced it in many respects. A lot of universities that decided to go fully online were then immediately asked, "Can you justify the same price?"
Right.
And as far as I'm aware, most of them were like, "Yes, we can."
Yeah, NYU raised their tuition this year. That's
right.
crazy.
And some of them had to. They're losing out on the room and board, and a lot of those other fees that are occurring. But it's going to be harder conversations down the line. It'll be interesting to see where it goes.
And I guess it also open like alternative places where you can get accreditation online and probably not pay as much and maybe be just as valued.
Something I've thought about with this e-learning is, let's say you are at your local university and each class is effectively $5,000. At the end of the day, that's what you're paying per class. But you could take the same class, e-learning, from MIT or just a better teacher who's somewhere else. Why do you have to give the money to your university or to take it distance learning when you can take it from a distance learning from somebody else?
Yeah.
Everything else is the same. It's still a distance. You're still communicating with the professor via email. You're still in classes. And that could have a disruptive effect on education, on higher education, really, because why shouldn't students want to find the best version of each class? If you know you have to take if you know you have to take a writing course, why not take the best version? Why would you have to be forced to take your local college's one? And like I said, we already have these systems in place with a certification for e-learning that's been in place for many years.
Right.
Where if I want to get certified in using a certain computer program, I take an e-learning course, I take a test, I pay for the certification. Provided I pass, I get the certification. So we already have this system in place. This system could be expanded to what we currently see now. And that could do a lot of damage to local universities, because if they don't have the best version of a class, or if they don't have the most interesting class, should they?
Right, and there's virtually no barrier to entry as well.
Right.
Like you could take a Harvard writing class and you don't have to get into the school of Harvard undergrad.
Right. And as long as you're paying for the certification fee, provided you pass the class, just like the students at Harvard writing are, you're In what respect can you not be
Right.
there? Right.
Absolutely.
Now the professor has the right to refuse entry based on, and the school does, based on class size. You can only have so many students in a classroom. Would the school then only choose the top students on a per class basis? Something they could do. You no longer have to get into Tisch, creative writing program, but you
Yeah.
can take a class at Tisch provided your nonfiction writing is top notch because you applied to get into that one class. It could be a very interesting system decades down the line. It would take a while.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
and it may never happen. Everyone may just be like, when pandemic ends, we may just say, okay, we're so sick of e-learning. There's just not enough interest in it. We really want to go back to physical in class. It's absolutely a possibility as well. But I definitely see this long-term change in e-learning and change in the question of why am I at the school I'm at when I could take a better
Right.
version of this required class somewhere else using the same format. I mean, we already know
The
colleges.
same as, go on, sorry.
I was going to say, we already know colleges allow transfer classes. You could take a
Right,
class at
exactly.
another college and bring it in. Why
Right,
not?
and get
Why
the
not
same
do,
amount of credits for it.
right? Why not do that? And the main barrier I see is what's called residency requirements, where colleges require you to have a certain number of courses at their college to get their college's degree.
Mm.
I don't know. Maybe those aren't going to be in play when it comes to virtual classes.
I can almost imagine a world where there's not so much an emphasis on the degree, but on the classes in which you took from different institutions or not even institutions. I feel like the power would go to the professor, the person teaching the class, because you could even bring this idea to high school, and you don't have to attend your local high school if it's online. You could just find the best people who teach whatever subject that you're, I guess, required to take to get some kind of accreditation. So it's like I took a chemistry class from who happens to be a great AP chemistry teacher in, I don't know, Michigan or something, compared to where I am in Silicon Valley. And then moving forward, it's more so, well, I studied under this person, this person, this person, and this person with these expertise, instead of I have this overall degree from this one institution and what that one institution represents. So it's very interesting.
Yeah. Now the one hang up at the moment is most universities have it so the university owns the intellectual property to the e-courses, not the professor themselves. And so that's one of those hang-ups. But if universities see that they could make more money or an equivalent amount of money selling certifications for some of their preferred teachers, they might not fight that as hard. It's going to be very interesting, but that's the exact scenario I've been thinking of for the past couple months. It is kind of exactly as you laid it out, where you're no longer like, I have the degree from this university, but look at who I've taken these courses under. And there's many other fields where that's the case, where it's more important who you learned a musical instrument under, or who you did an apprenticeship under. So it's almost like an apprenticeship system.
Yeah.
We're kind of like circling back to a weird apprenticeship where you take like a 3-month apprenticeship to fulfill your educational requirements. Whoever you want to do. You could choose by
this is the mentorship. Exactly.
You could choose by the cheapness of the course. You could choose by, the best professor if you can get in, because there's still limits. But it could be a very interesting system that does a lot of disruption to the classic. Now people still want to go to college. They still want to go away, be on their own, party, have fun, like that. That still wants to. There's still a big drive for that. But that can, I don't know. I think that can coexist.
Well, you touched on something that was that made my ears like perk up for a second. So I was like, you were like, well, if they can make more money from this system, then maybe they would consider it. And it really comes down to like what the college values, and the college has to stay up, and then lots of colleges make money or have huge endowments as well, and state systems need funding for their state programs. So it's really, I feel like the job of where the possibility of impact lies for most social entrepreneurs or people who want to change education then is pitching this in a way to these college groups and educational groups where, hey, like you're gonna make just as much money or you'll make more in this capitalistic system, and you don't have to offer the same things you used to offer. You could try it this way. And as soon as one, I don't know, major institution embodies that, I feel like it could change the game for like many to follow. Because
Yeah.
in tech, it's like a very winner takes all world. I grew up in the Bay Area, so I've
Mm.
seen like these companies go from nothing to like massive like corporations. And the ones who start, the first two, 1, 2, 3, are usually the ones who end up becoming the industry standards.
Yeah.
Yeah, sorry, you just got me really
No,
passionate about it.
no, and that's right. And that's the thing. Like this is there could be a future for this.
Mhm.
There will be a lot of fighting about it. There will be legal battles about it. You know, there will be a lot of questions. Like, again, why am I taking this class here when I could take it somewhere
Mhm.
else? And it's like, oh, you were accepted into that school is like kind of the only answer that they've got. You're like,
Exactly.
okay,
Yeah.
but what if I pay to take this other course? You are accepting transfer credits, right? And so I don't know. It'll be
I don't
interesting.
know. I mean, I see the potential in this. I just don't think it'll happen. Just
Right.
because I think colleges are going to want people to have degrees from their school rather than dibbling and dabbling from different places. And maybe some people will do it and there'll be like the non-traditional pathways. But I feel like, you know, in order to make things, I guess, easier and simpler, um, people or colleges are going to want students to have degrees from just their school, right?
Right.
And obviously transfer credits are a thing. Like I have transfer credits from different summer programs that I've done in the past, but I don't know. I don't see this. I don't see it as being feasible. That's all.
Well,
Well, I
yes. I
feel
mean,
like
like I said,
Interesting, yes, but
no,
feasible.
yeah, no, it's like I said, it's interesting to think about. It's kind of fun. I don't agree it's going to happen
Definitely.
completely because people don't want to just do e-learning forever. Like
Yeah,
that's, you know, there is
exactly.
still this big desire to actually physically go to campuses,
Definitely.
and not always for the educational reasons as well. So there
right.
is this need,
Yeah.
but you know, I can see the program expanding. And again, not everyone's going to take advantage of it, right? You're probably going to get the more driven students who are going to want to take advantage of being able to take e-learning classes at wherever to find the best professor in, you know, teaching whatever. That's definitely the characteristic of a very driven student. But it is fun to think about.
Yeah.
I agree. I don't think it's going to happen because I don't think it's going to happen in this sort of way because people don't love e-learning.
Yeah.
I don't think really anybody. There are some people who are like, yes, I like this better than in person, but they tend to be the ones who don't want to do the work.
Yeah. Or there
And
could
so,
be a hybrid. There could be
right,
like half in class, half e-learning. I would love to do something like that because then I could really schedule my time and be able to maybe like travel while I do classes. That would be fun. But then I would also want the opportunity to like be in class too. Because like Tommy said, like I love being in class, like raising my hand, just like interacting with students, interacting with the professor. Like that's what makes class and school fun, you
right,
know, for me at least.
right. And if you have to do distance learning, like now, that's a very different scenario than when you can choose to do it.
Exactly.
Right.
Right.
The choice is definitely key.
I wonder about the effect that it would have on like socialization, to be honest, and like the whole second aspect to going to school, which is, you know, meeting people and going out and having interesting conversations, but also the day-to-day movement activities and meeting, yeah, just social interaction, really.
Right. Well, you know, life is really kind of changed right now when you can't have the in-person social interaction.
Mhm.
Mm-hmm.
So people have found ways around that, right? People get together, you know, virtually. I know people doing a lot of like virtual dating, like online dating, but in the literal everyone's online type of a situation. So restrictions are loosening up right now. Who knows if they'll get back down, but we're finding ways around that. We're finding ways to interact with people, but it can be very lonely, especially if you live alone, right? You don't have like any kind of like physical interaction with people. That's why people don't want this full time. But if you can afford it, you have the ability to kind of like Lexi, you were saying, like I can travel and do my college degree wherever, whenever I want to, and then possibly with like the best people or the most interesting courses or the ones that fit my schedule the best, there's a lot of appeal there. Not as a full online, but
Hybrid.
yeah. But that requires a lot. That requires ability, that requires finances, that requires a lot of things going on for all of these systems to be at play. And I don't see the college system being dismantled. But there are a lot of colleges, and on its own, a lot of them are in danger right now in terms of failing from being able to stay open.
Mm-hmm.
That may happen. A lot of colleges may fail because of this, because a lot of students are thinking, I think I'm going to stick with this online version and do whatever my residency requirement is to get my local college's degree at first.
It's quite a massive opportunity for people looking to because the college system may not fail, but how we approach learning could change drastically. And I think that's what value we place on learning, right? Like if an employer like Google or Apple or people in the tech world so desperately want to work at changes what they value, and they want to see the specific courses, as we mentioned earlier, it's going to change what the students focus on.
There has been some
goals.
There has been some talk where I think I remember reading maybe a couple of weeks ago, Google is looking at really changing the way that they approach requirements for employment, and not really weighing college degrees that much, but looking much more at independent program or certifications. So we're kind of back at the certification approach right here. And yeah, once companies start looking at that more and more, now I do think that personally think there's a huge advantage to a much more like classical liberal arts education. And part of that is you're exposed to a lot of things that you might not know that you're interested in. And I think there's great value in that. It kind of just makes people more interesting people. Aside from also learning more about the world, learning, not just being focused on one thing, but who knows how it'll shake up. It'll definitely take decades. And I definitely think if it starts to move, there'll be legal battles behind it. But it'll be fun to see.
So as we wrap up the last few minutes of the interview, I'd like to ask you a question that Tommy and I usually ask a lot of people that we interview. And it's if you had a billboard on every street corner in the world.
Oh God.
Oh, I didn't put this in the questions for you. I'm sorry.
You did not. It's okay.
But yeah, if you had a billboard on every street corner in the world, what would it say and why? So like a one-liner.
No, it could be longer if you would.
It could be longer, yeah. Well, yeah, no limits.
Every street corner. Okay. And part of my, I'm going to ask for clarifications, partially as a way to stall for time.
Sure.
All right. So every street corner. So it's going to get real repetitive, real fast.
No one's mentioned that. That's actually a really good point.
Eventually, you're just going to stop looking at it, because it's kind of like when you live in New York City, you stop looking up. You first get there, you look up.
Right.
And then once you live there for a little bit, you notice the only people that look up are tourists.
Yeah.
Because you know what's up there. It's nothing. Or water, mysterious liquids you don't want to know too much more about.
This
or
is
the
great.
same advertisement 50 times.
Yeah. Okay. So it's going to have an impact at first, and then people are going to ignore it. So because people are going to ignore it, I actually don't want it to be something super.
I mean, people are going to ignore it, but then maybe one day when someone's looking up, they'll see it and it could change their life forever.
Right.
I guess that is true, because there'll be new generations of people who've never seen that before.
Right. Ah, boy.
Hey, Dad, have you seen this before? He's like,
Yes.
yeah, it's been here 50 years.
It's on every street
Yeah.
corner, right? In every language.
Yeah, every language. Like a life motto, maybe?
I don't
No,
know.
like my life mottos you don't want plastered on every, like my life mottos are things like you have to eat, so do it well. Like that's not something you want plastered on every
Not very
single
fierce, though.
I
billboard
kind of like that. You have
around.
to eat to do it well.
um,
That one,
maybe,
though.
so this is actually going to sound a little more, I don't know the right term, Mr. Rogers-esque than I was originally. I was like, okay, you definitely don't want something like I believe in you, because everyone's just going to start ignoring it. You don't know who the I is.
That is true.
Right? Is this like,
Who
is this the
who is
government
this
telling
I?
me, right? Like the
Yeah.
and it's every government. I would say, though, yeah, if it's going to be on every billboard all around the world, it's going to be ignored by most people, but new people will keep looking at it. And maybe it would be something like, love is all we have.
Mm.
Because that's important to remember every once in a while, but you can ignore it and go about your daily life without without that being too detrimental. So on every street corner around the world, it would sort of be a weird periodic reminder that if you're standing at a traffic light, you're parked at a traffic light at a red light, you're just kind of looking around. You don't have your phone out or whatever the new technology will be. It might catch your eye. You might go, okay. There's a little bit of vagueness there that people might think about it or talk about it for longer than something very clear, right? Something like be happy, right? Like that's not going to be debated. So even new kids will see that, like younger people will see that and say, what is, be happy. And you're like, yeah, like we've all seen that, ignore it. But love is all we have kind of gets at this, like, it's a little bit vague. It gets to sort of like, what does it mean to be a person? Um, you could debate thinking about life and death with it. So there's like a built-in ambiguity that people could derive meaning from. You're not going to have a whole population of people ignoring the words "be happy." Yeah, so maybe that, with my reasonings, kind of as I was thinking it through.
All we have. I think that would make some people, like, you could read that on the way to work and not think about it, and then while you're in the car, like, all we have.
Right. You're out with friends and
All
you're
we
like,
have.
is love all we have? And you're like, okay, now we're talking about, right, exactly.
Yeah,
So
yeah. I mean, it's powerful enough to think about, but then also at the same time, you can easily read it and it'll just go right past you.
right, which it will, no matter what you put on a billboard.
Yeah,
You'll
exactly.
eventually, if it's all over the world, you'll eventually ignore it, and it'll just kind of be part of the background. So yeah, like I said, if it was too easy, if it was too like be happy, um, it might not enter your consciousness again. You might, maybe when you need it, like you'll see it and you're like, okay. But then if it's on every single street corner, it doesn't feel personal.
Yeah. Our age, if you knew what you know now, what would you ask them?
What
What would you
ask
ask
them?
them? I don't know
20.
this one.
What would you tell them? Sorry, what advice would you give to
Oh
them?
God, yeah.
Oh yeah,
I
it's
wouldn't
pretty
want to know
common.
what my 21-year-old self has to say on anything. um,
That's pretty funny.
what would I tell my 21-year-old self? So as of right now, I would probably tell my 21-year-old self for all of those things that you're thinking of that you don't think you're going to accomplish, or you're worried you're not going to accomplish, or whatever those things are. And I know what those things are. Just go for it. Like that would be my advice to my sort of 21-year-old self. Like, you're thinking about traveling, you're thinking about going, learning something new, you're thinking about trying out for something, applying someplace. That would be my advice. Would be like, just go for it, because it's one of those things that I kind of knew, like everyone hears, but as you get older, you really start to say like, wow. And I'm 36. I remember what 36-year-olds looked like and how I thought about them when I was 21. So I can say I'm not old, but but as you get older, it's definitely one of those you go, why didn't I try out for that team? Why didn't I try and learn this thing? Why did I waste this opportunity? And then you're kind of like, oh, well, because I thought I wouldn't get it. Like that's, looking back on it, that's always like the most garbage answer you can give. Where at the time, it's like, no, I don't want to go through. It's a lot of work to go through the process. And what if they say no? And what if I don't get in? And whatever it is, that would be my advice to 21-year-old me. Is like, for all of those things, not just one thing. Like all of those things you're thinking about, just go for it. See how far you can go. And
Even the things that you were faintly interested in.
yeah, because I might be faintly interested in them and then try them and be like, wow, not only am I not interested in this anymore, I am garbage at this thing, and I will never be good at this thing. But it didn't take up too much of my time, right? That doesn't mean like I'm going to go dedicate the next 10 years of my between 21 and 31 to being a modern art painter. Like, it's just something I can't do. Like, that's not what I had interest in. But
what if you're interested in so many things? You're interested in like so many things, and you can't put your attention to all of those things, can you? Right?
You can move each of them a little bit forward,
Yeah,
and then
exactly.
and then see how each one plays out. Like, oh, I do like this. I don't like this. I like this. I'd like to get better. Even the things that you're good at that you like like Tommy, do you know how far you can get playing the trumpet? Would that be something you'd want to, like, would you want to join a jazz band or a classical band? Do you know, like, I don't know if you have any interest in that, but even if like a tiny piece of you is like, I don't know, that'd be fun. That's that version of that. That's just like, because you might try it, you might fail, and you're like, okay, I've gone as far as I can go in this, and I'm happy with that level, and I know I can't really go any further. And Lexi, same thing, and then young me, same thing. Like, whatever those things are, like, go as far as you can, and you can move each piece a little bit, and then eventually you'll either get to where you wanted to go, or what's most likely, you'll go as far as you can. You'll get outclassed. You just won't be able to dedicate the time or the attention. But as you get older, you run out of that time. You run out of that free time. If it's like something physical, your body just can't handle it.
Yeah.
I'm not going to be a professional athlete at 36. Like, that's just not happening. But at 21, I don't know, maybe there would be a sport. Like, there was a couple things I was doing.
It's very possible.
So that would be my advice to my younger self. Like, for all of those things that you're interested in pursuing, go for it. Just see how far you can go, and in each of them, or in all of them you can do. Just see how far you can go, and then you'll know.
I think some of those things are very time dependent. Like, you're only young for so long, and your body can only function at a high physical level for.
And once you have kids, there's like a whole nother point of your attention that you just can't dedicate to these things anymore.
Yeah.
Right. Because your life is no longer solely about yourself and your interests.
Exactly.
Very, very eye-opening.
It's been really nice hearing your perspective and things.
Well, thank you. It was nice talking to both of you.